County Board of Equalization hearings. There are 6 cases on the agenda and there are 6 board members present. Mr. Hoffman is absent today. The first case is RPC 14043-028, 801 North Quincy Street. Mr. Yanoni, you can start your 8 minutes and tell us about this property, sir.
Thank you. As mentioned, the subject property is a Class A office building located at 801 North Quincy Street. It's at the corner of Wilson Boulevard, across from the Ann Pizza and Gold's Gym, if that rings a bell for anybody. The current assessment is $32,204,100, and our estimate of value is $21,850,100. On page 3 of 138 is where the county has prepared a summary of our income approach, as well as their original assessment and revised test column. And I'll quickly run through the approach that we had, as well as the county's original approach and their test. So to conduct our opinion of value, we maintained the county's original market rents at $35 for the office and vacant office, as well as $40 for the retail. Being that the property was about 32% vacant as of the date of valuation, we increased the vacancy on the property from 25% on the original assessment to 28%, which is the maximum allowed by the guidebook. Additionally, for operating expenses, being that the 2023 operating expenses did increase pretty significantly, roughly $10.49 as reported, we upped that to $10.50 per square foot to match that T12 data. This resulted in an NOI slightly above the reported NOI, which was adjusted by the county due to leasing commissions being included. So now slightly below what the county is proposing as the correct NOI. The big adjustment that we made on this, and I'm sure has been discussed in detail, is the cap rate. We applied an 8 base cap rate and loaded it with the tax rate. And this I will get into more detail on shortly. And we have additionally deducted the excess vacancy below the line for the 4% that's not accounted for above the line of the square footage. And then additionally, we've deducted the actual 2023 CapEx spend below the line, which I know is a little bit backwards facing. There's been some confusing, feedback from the county on if they account for CapEx forward facing, backwards facing, or at all. So, we elected to deduct that actual spend below the line, although it doesn't look like the county agreed with that approach in their test. So quickly jumping to the test column, there were some adjustments made that we'd like to bring to the board's attention. So if you look in column F, you could see that there were some adjustments to the market rents applied, some of which, supported by actual rents, such as the retail rent per square foot, and other adjustments such as the vacant office. You could see the rents were jumped from $35 a foot to $35.50 a foot. So an extra 50 cents per square foot. We're not exactly, sure where that came from. And another thing worth mentioning is if you see in rows 5 and 6, 115,000 of miscellaneous income is being included twice on this column. And after taking a second look at the INE, I believe that this came from, and we actually did include it as other income on our initial pass, but if we look at the income and expense submission on page, I'm going to take a quick jump here, 127 of 137, we could see the line I08 or 108 miscellaneous income of 108,000 is interest income that was included on the income and expense submission. And, upon review of, and we do appreciate the county catching the leasing commission expense, which we would agree should be removed from operating expenses and maybe moved to capital. However, it looks like the miscellaneous interest income, which is not an operating income, may have been mistakenly included on that test column, and something we would like for, the county and the board to consider. And then additionally, on the test column, operating expenses were increased to $10.25 a foot. And while we do understand, with the exclusion of the leasing commissions, that it is, not far off from the 2023 operating expenses, with the inflationary pressures and leasing efforts at the property, we think that, in a stabilized income scenario, we should be looking at some increases to the operating expenses. So we would appreciate a consideration of, readjustment to $10.50 on that. And, overall, I would like to say that, despite these small discrepancies in the test column and the original assessment, Chris has done an excellent job this year of kind of trying to account for the property specific issues above the line, and overall has been, pretty good with his NOI calculations and accounting for vacancy up front, as well as, on the revisions. And I think, the real reason we're here today, and many other appellants I'm sure are here for office properties, is the cap rates being applied by the county. So I'm going to jump to the appellant documentation page. Just a second. A lot of pages here. 35 of 137, where we've included a summary of our findings on cap rate surveys. And as you could see, for example, the RERC survey for, first tier East, as well as Washington, D.C., those cap rates came in at 8.1 and 7.9 base. And then additionally, for the Northern Virginia office market, fourth quarter 2023 PwC survey, the range was 6 to 10%, with a mean of 7.08%. And then, looking at the county guidelines and what cap rates being applied for this property, for example, which is a 6.3, which is the very bottom of the range of the surveyed range for Northern Virginia. One can start to ask themselves, where did these cap rates come from and how are they being derived and supported by the county? And while we do understand they have the presumption of correctness and there is an issue of equalization, I think the larger issue becomes, the explanation of these cap rates, what's driving them, are they coming from surveys, et cetera. So we did get a chance to review the Corpaz capitalization rate study that was conducted for the Arlington County Assessment Office, as well as Fairfax County. And we've prepared a little commentary on that on page 40 of 137. And it's pretty detailed, and I hope that the board has had a chance to review it to some extent. And if not, maybe for future cases, this is something we've included in all office cases and is worthy of discussion. So it's worth noting, off the bat, the Corpaz capitalization rate study, they conducted an average cap rate of 6.4% for Arlington County, while they simultaneously concluded an average cap rate of 8.63% for Fairfax County. So roughly over a 200 basis point difference. And while I understand that, the two markets are very different and Arlington County is a robust market, the difference seems to be a little bit of a head scratcher. So we did look at, how they concluded these cap rates and the sales they use. And what we found is that the cap rates used to conclude Arlington County's, average cap rates are that the sales are dated and frankly flawed, and there isn't a very big sample size. So if you look at pages 41, 40 and 41 of 137 in the BOE memo, page 8 and 9 of the appellant documentation, we've actually run through some of these sales. There are 4 sales that are from 2021 to 2022. So 2 of which are in the district, and all of these sales were, in the low 5s of, highly, let's just say, attractive properties compared to your average office in the district. I'm sorry, in the county. So
Mr. Tony, I need you to wrap up because your 8 minutes has expired.
Okay, so I would just, appreciate the board to look at those sales and consider them in terms of the fact there's some similarity to the property, and also note, the recent sales in the county, such as the 1201 Wilson, as well as 1776 Wilson, which point to much higher cap rates for the subject property. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chikas for the county, please.
Yes, ma'am. Good morning, board members. Good morning, Mr. Iannone. What we're going to do is focus upon the summary sheet. I believe it's page 3 of the packet. And when looking at the income stream for the past 4 years and focusing primarily upon the January 1 assessment, you can see that the county was under projecting across the board, almost $350,000 under what was achieved. And again, please note that the INEs are listing actuals. This is not gross potential that they're displaying, but actuals. And of the actual that they display, it's $350,000 below what we projected. Higher than what we projected. You go down to effective gross, you'll see the same thing. The county underprojected the actuals at $53,000. We were within 16,000, within 1.5% of what was achieved as far as operating expenses. And again, 1.5% of what was achieved at the NOI level. And again, under projecting NOI by almost 40,000. We did look at, again, the rent roll and noted that there's only 2 tenants, I believe, that were scheduled to expire this year, both under 1,000 square feet. All of their larger tenants, the government, and some of those support services are contracted for the next 7+ years. It's a well-located property within about 2 blocks of Ballston Metro, then 3 blocks of Virginia Square. You know, this is a property where I think it's a sort of a head scratcher of why we're here. Mr. Iannone did bring up some of the issues that they believe are the bigger spotlights, which is the cap rate. And then quoted himself the CORPAC study, which we had available to us prior to the data valuation, of an average cap rate of 6.4% and a range of 5.75 to 8. Some of the other studies he noted, surveys he noted, were, of course, fourth quarter. As we've said to the board many times, of course, we did not have access to the fourth quarter at the time of the valuation. Neither would have been available at the time of the data valuation of January 1st, as they come out after the first of the year. We did go ahead and test that to account for the difference in vacancy, as you can see in column F. Again, our rents projected are quite a bit below what's actually being achieved as far as the rents in place. Same thing with the asking rents. The asking rents, at least per CoStar, are actually a good bit higher than $35.50. In regards to the interest line, you know, that is possible that is something we missed, but at the same point, please note that that's $300,000 less as our original projection. So again, our original projection did not account for that money. So again, 300,000 plus lower than what was achieved. And again, as far as actuals, this is not gross potential that the appellants are sending us as far as their INEs. When you look at the assessment, you see that we're below what was achieved for gross potential, below what was achieved for effective gross, and within 1.5% of what was achieved for operating expenses and for NOI. We do believe that the county should be confirmed at a real property value of $29,695,500, almost an 8% decline year over year, even after a growth of 7% NOI growth year over year. That is all. Thank you.
Thank you both. Questions from board members? Mr. Mendez.
Yeah, for the county. And I'm just wondering why 25% was used for the vacancy in the original assessment. Typically, we see 20.
Yes, sir. So the appraiser looks at what's listed for vacant space vis-a-vis CoStar, and then applies the rate that would have been applied. In this case, I believe the range is 18 to 23%, and that's what he was applying, was 25% for the building itself.
Thank you.
Again, that demonstrates CoStar isn't the Bible. It's strict. Yeah, I shouldn't use that term. I'm sorry. Quick question for the department. I have 2 questions. First one, both for the department. First one's easy. On column D, the original, excuse me, for row 1, office income, actual income. Above it is, you know, the net leasable area, then the vacant space, and that nets out to 73,028 square feet of office space actually rented as the date of value. I'm reading that right? The 2 smaller numbers, 110,000 plus, 37,000 plus. So what's left is 73,000 plus. And this is your work, right? I want to make sure I'm reading this right. So I'm going to another.
I believe that's correct. I can verify.
Okay, great.
Vis-a-vis
So, and then of course, so the 73,028 square feet is valued at $39.05. I come out a square foot. I come out not with 1,900,000 plus, but 2,850,000 plus. simple, and I didn't, unless my calculator is hiccuping, I've done it 3, 4 times. It's a big difference there. And I know that you don't hand crank this, a software program does it for you, but I would like you to hand crank that simple multiplication now, make sure I'm right, because I'm going to another point.
So is it possible that you're also including retail square footage with that number? The number that was used vis-a-vis
No,
the number that
39.
was used vis-a-vis the worksheet that's on page, I believe it's 6 of 138 shows that.
Yeah, got it. Yeah, no, I would have been double counting retail. That's where I missed it. Thanks a lot. Okay.
Yes, sir.
So I don't need to go further than that. So let me ask you the other question. This comes up all the time, and I'm the biggest perpetrator of all, saying that why don't you use sales from November and maybe early December because there's so few office building sales. What I heard you say was that in order to calculate cap rates, of course. And I'm saying, well, 1, 2, you can always throw them in late December. But I heard you say, this is the first time I've heard any department person say that we calculate them sooner than, January 1st, obviously. But are you calculating them in November or October such that you can't include these late sales? Is that what's going on?
That's correct. We need approximately 6 weeks or so to not only value some 6,000 commercial properties, but we also, of course, need to have a period of quality control where we can verify the information that we put into our RIA system. The bigger issue is that the fourth quarter surveys and information comes out after January 1st.
That's really what I was getting at. Thank you. You don't know what happened to sales because you don't get it from the trade.
That's
Get
correct.
it from some other published source, some private source, I guess.
That is correct.
That I was completely unaware of. That you did say that. That's how I meant to frame my question. Thank you.
Mr. Chicas, if you take a minute to wrap up then.
Yes, ma'am. So again, focusing primarily upon column D, the original assessment, you can see from top to bottom, the county underprojected what was achieved. And again, as reported as actuals, not gross potential by the appellant INE. So when looking top to bottom, you'll see that the county underprojected gross potential by over 7%, so $350,000, almost 2% of effective gross, so over 53,000. And we're within 1.5% of the operating expenses incurred, as well as the NOI. NOI increased by over 7% year over year. We've established vis-a-vis the rent roll that the primary tenants are in place for the next 7+ years. We think we underprojected top to bottom. Therefore, we do believe that the county's original assessment of $29,695,500, again, a year-over-year drop of almost 8%, should be confirmed. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Iannone, if you take a minute to wrap up, sir.
Yes, thank you. I would just request the board to consider the interest income that was added on the revision in the magnitude of roughly $108,000, which is not considered operating income, and would request your consideration in removing that from the test column. And then additionally, again, I know it's a lot to hash out in 8 minutes, but our cap rate response is very extensive and written out in all of our appeal submissions. So I'd really appreciate the board's review of that and consideration of the sales that were included, specifically 1776 Wilson, which we believe is the most comparable, which indicates a much higher cap rate than what is being applied to the subject property, in the magnitude of about 100 basis points. And it's being skewed artificially downward by DC 2021 sales that are highly occupied buildings that have no relation to the average office property in Arlington, Virginia. And additionally, the more recent sales of properties such as 1201 Wilson and 2 Liberty, which both sold in 8 to 9 cap rates, which further validate, the very skewed nature of the Arlington cap rate conclusions. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, it's just among the board members. Mr. Lawson.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and throw this out. Following up on your question, the only adjustment that I thought I should make was on the assessment column D. I substituted 28% for 25, ended up at 28,307,700. I'll see if anyone agrees with that.
What was the NOI that used?
What was the NOI? $2,189,016.
Remember, you'd have to change the below the line. Red deduction, if you.
No, I
increase.
didn't do that.
So that's.
So that would become
well
a smaller number.
I try to do the same
Okay.
thing.
Tremendous.
But I looked at the test column and it looks like the county tried to, they were really low on the GPI, column D to begin with. So, they made that adjustment in the test column and they bumped the vacancy to 28%. The expenses average $8.40 a year. So, they even bumped it up to $10.25 and it tested out higher than the current assessment. So considering all that, I would be okay with the county's current assessment.
Okay.
When I started going through this, I looked at column D and looking at the 3 prior years, I was very surprised at the numbers that they came out with in D. I'm thinking, boy, they're being generous. And then when the E came out, and then the test, I think the county did one heck of a good job. I'm amazed that they came up with as high numbers as they did in D. But it proved out, they were right. E came in much higher and the test worked. So I'm fine with D.
That's good.
But it is a cap rate issue more than anything, because a lot of numbers are complementary throughout the various columns. And we've heard a lot of testimony, and we didn't hear it today, heard it often enough to accept the rationale the county used. So kudos to the work the appellant did in this regard, but we've already had the response. I have a question for us. I guess I was going to, but decided not to ask the defendant, the department about this. But that miscellaneous, this is in column F, the miscellaneous charge of $115,000. I'm asking it now because in the 1-minute wrap up, the appellant re-emphasized it, that was interest income and it's not an operating expense. Maybe we're not qualified to determine whether it is or not. I assumed it was. If it isn't, it brings the test down $500,000 less than column D, the original. So it does matter a bit. Do you have experience with this, Mitch?
Well, I think it does matter overall, but compared to what their actuals are, it's still, lower than they are reporting.
Right, it's not in the original assessment.
Regardless of that.
It's not in the original assessment, so
And yeah, and I would agree to.
So we'll go-
increase it to 28% if the numbers were really in line with what they are reporting, but the county used such low numbers originally with the GPI, so I'm okay with the original assessment.
fair enough.
I tested increasing the expenses of the 1050, but still comes up higher than the current assessment.
Should
The
we,
original is still lower than your adjustments. All right.
should we apply the cap rate in column F to column D? I did that as a slight reduction.
Yeah, that rounding.
Yeah, because
Yeah,
it rounded.
that's the department said many, many times, that's a lack in their software.
Yeah,
And so good one, good catch.
I ended up at 29,513, 200.
Good
And that's
one.
just using the 7.545.
Yeah, going up to 3.6.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the county's number. I mean, they would not dispute that.
Want to go ahead and make a motion, Madam
No, I
Chair?
don't want you to yet.
Okay,
I don't know if you got enough votes to do it. So
I mean,
Oh.
we bypassed that before in other cases. In favor pretty much of the appellant. So, like I said, I'm okay with it. It's a very minor.
but isn't the cap rate in column F what should be applied because they're in the Boston, whatever it is, the Boston?
Bid area.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's,
That's applying the tax of the bid, or
it's
the fees of the bid.
it's a software failure, weakness. That's the word I was looking for.
Well, there's a lot of,
Nobody did anything wrong. It just, this comes up all the time and the department usually points it out to us.
And changes it.
And change it.
Yeah,
Well, and they
there's
changed
a
it.
lot of imperfections both
What
ways.
is- okay. What is your final number there?
Uh, Someone can double check my math. I came up 29,513,000 and I rounded up to 200.
I just checked your.
So,
So it's a slight decrease.
Very slight, yeah, just added the bid in, I guess.
I keep,
That's fine.
All right, Mr. Lawson.
I'll make a motion that we reduce the assessment to 29,513,200. And the justification for that is to apply the cap rate in column F to the figure in column D.
What's the correct cap rate?
yeah, fortunately, the correct.
Okay, do I have a second? Mr. Mendez, all in favor?
No,
Aye. Opposed? Okay, it's unanimous. The assessment's reduced to 29,513,200 based on applying the corrected cap rate to the original assessment.
And Madam Chairman, I'll say,
Can you hold on, please? Due to the fact that the incorrect cap rate was put on the original assessment due to rounding. Thank you.
I was just going to second what the applicant said about, about the good work that Chris did. And I think that was probably just an oversight.
Could have been brought up if it was an oversight. Okay, moving along. Are you gonna?
I'm going to step out.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The record show that Mr. Lawson is leaving. He has a conflict on the remaining case. Okay, the second case on the agenda is RPC 14044-261 at 818 North Quincy Street. The appellant has asked to withdraw this. I assume, Mr. Chief, if there's any objection,
No, ma'am.
I'll move to accept the withdrawal. Do I have a second? Mendez, all in favor? Aye. Okay, that is unanimous. That withdrawal is accepted. The next RPC is 1501212A at 3150 12th Court North. The appellant has also asked to withdraw that. I do no objection, Mr. Chikas.
No, ma'am.
Okay, motion to accept the withdrawal for the second.
Second.
Mr. Matskin, all in favor? Aye, that's unanimous. The withdrawal is accepted. The next case, do we have Mr. Harmon, Mr. Peralta up?
Good morning.
Morning. There we go.
Good
Okay,
morning.
next case on the agenda is RPC 1800710 on North Cleveland Street. Again, Mr. Lawson has a conflict on this, so he's removed himself. So there are 5 board members present. Mr. Harmon, you can start with your 8 minutes and tell us about this property.
Yes, thank you. So this property is actually 2500 Wilson Boulevard. It's on Wilson right after the Whole Foods there in Courthouse, Clarendon. This is a 108,000 square foot office building. It was built in 1984 and has had a high vacancy over each of the past 5 years. Beginning on January 1st of 2020, vacancy was 62%. Then for 2021, it was 63%. Then going to January 1 of 2022, it was 49%. For January 1 of 2023, it was also at 49%. And it is at 49% as of the date of value as well. We do have so over the past 5 years, this property's had an average vacancy rate of over 56%. Now we do have a 2023 sale count that was not analyzed by the county. That is 4601 Fairfax Drive. That property was better occupied at the time of sale with only 40% vacant at the time of sale in August of 2023. That property was built in 1986, similar year as the subject. That property sold for $102 per square foot. The current assessment on the subject property, again with greater vacancy, is double what that sale count was. The current assessment is at $203 a foot. So how does the current assessment for the subject with higher vacancy than a good sale count that sold August of 2023 come in at twice the value of that sale count? Well, primarily it's the cap rate. The sale count cap rate was over 20%. Again, that did not make it into the county's cap rate analysis. The only sale that was used for the county's cap rate analysis was the Microsoft building in Roslyn. That was a February 2022 sale, and that property was 92% occupied with a credit tenant who had just signed a 10-year lease for over 180,000 square feet. So the sale count, better occupied, cap rate was over 20%. Current assessment imputes a cap rate of just over 8%. Now, the other issues, how does the assessment get to double what the sale count was? It's also understating operating expenses and understating the DFL. So the county's proposed 3 different valuations. They have the current assessment, their test, and a reconstructed 2023 column. So I'll try to get through all of those in the limited amount of time I have this morning. Looking at the current assessment first on column D, we see that operating expenses are reflective of what this property has been operating at when it's been 50% vacant over the past 5 years. Now, the assessment has grown income by 50% to account for income on vacant office space at the property. Then it backs that out with a 28% vacancy rate. That results in a net increase in income on the assessment of 22% of NLA. Comparing row 11 on column E and row 11 on column D, we see that the assessment uses effective gross income, that is income after vacancy and collection loss has been deducted, that is over $1 million higher than what the property actually achieved in 2023. No similar adjustment has been made to the operating expenses. The assessment essentially tells us that the property should have over $1 million in additional income imputed, but there should be no equivalent adjustment to operating expenses to get to that hypothetical stabilized occupancy. This, of course, is not logical if we're imputing income on a hypothetical tenant leasing 22% of additional NLA at the property earning an additional $1 million based on that hypothetical. We also need to account for growth in operating expenses that will follow from that hypothetical new tenant. Next, column D, the current assessment also provides a DFL. That DFL is based on the property being only 35% vacant, instead of the actual vacancy at the property as of the date of value, which was 50%. The county's test corrects the DFL by increasing the overall DFL by $2.5 million. But then the county's test claws that back by making errors and changing methodology in other sections. So if we want to just correct the DFL on the current assessment, that would be a place to look. The test does increase the DFL by another $2.5 million. So now switching over to the county's test in column F, the county increased OPEX slightly from the current assessment, didn't make that adjustment to the DFL to account for the actual vacancy at the property, but then it went back to the top line income and removed the majority of any recognition of concessions, which had the effect of wiping out any reduction. So looking at concessions on columns D and F, you can see office rental rates increased from the current assessment from $39 per square foot to $42 per square foot. Now, I assume, Mr. Peralta is going to say office leases actually average $44 a foot. Now, they knew that when they created the initial 2024 assessment. We appealed this property last year, and in October of last year, the county put forth their response where they said office space averaged $44 per square foot. So the county knew the current office average rate when they created that initial current assessment. They chose to deduct $5 per square foot to account for concessions. Then on review, they removed that. So the initial assessment did account for concessions. If we're looking at actual concessions at the property, we see that the actual concessions in 2023 were over $12 per leased square foot. Over the past 4 years, concessions have averaged $5.50 per leased square foot. So that's where that initial assessment, the current assessment reduction from the average office in place of $44 down to $39, it reduced it by $5 a foot. That's reflective of actual concessions that the properties achieved over the past 4 years. On the county's test column, they reduced that, they change it. We ask that the actual concessions be considered. So column D increases OPEX slightly, corrects the DFL, but then takes away any recognition of actual concessions at the property. Moving the test column back to $39 per square foot corrects this. Now, going to the 2023 reconstruction column in column E1, same issues as yesterday. This analysis overstates income by double counting income per space that was occupied for part of 2023 and paid rent that was copied over, but then was vacant as of the date of value. That income was also copied over to column E1. Same second issue on the reconstruction omits any concessions. They use actual income, actual expenses, no concessions. Concessions in 2023 were over $500,000. In total, the double counting of income, not including concessions, adding those up, the reconstruction column overstates NOI by nearly $700,000. So, that's the sum of the case. The county provides 3 separate valuation models to evaluate the property. Each has different errors. Current assessment accounts for concessions, but fails to grow OpEx, and also imputes a DFL that is not reflective of the actual vacancy at the property as of the date of value. The test column corrects the DFL by increasing it by $2.5 million over the current assessment, but then backs out recognition of concessions that were included on the current assessment when the county knew the current office rental rates and chose to recognize those concessions. Finally, the reconstructed column double counts income for 2
Right, I
different
need you to
suites
wrap
and
up.
fails to take any consideration of concessions.
All right,
Um,
thank you. Mr.
you're
Peralta for the county, please.
Open for questions.
Yes, thank you. What's important to see for this property is the previous years, A, B, C, and E have been reporting actual income. And if you were to look at the vacant square footage in each of those years, in column A, 65,000 plus, 64,000 plus, in column B, column C, 46,000, and then finally in 2023, 56,000. We imputed the income attributable to that vacant square footage in column E1. What you don't see is us adding the income, what should be the projected income for the previous years. So if you were to use the appellant's vacant square footage rent at 3510, you'd have to add another 2.2 million to column A, column B, another 2.2 million, and column C, another 3.6 million at that per square foot rate. So if you take that all the way down to the NOIs there should be closer to, in column A, 2.8, column B, 2.7, and then column C, 4. Sorry. 4.5, I believe. And I'm sorry, 4.1. So, looking at how the department reconstructed the 2023 INE, you'll see that the number 2.2 is indicative of that rent that was added for the vacant square footage. You see that in column E1, line A1, I'm sorry, 1A, the 1.9 million is the agent's imputed vacant square footage income. So when you look at that reconstructed column E and compare it to the original assessment at 1.8, we underestimated the potential gross of this property. In the original assessment, we did underestimate the vacant square footage. We made all the corrections to the test column. Our total NLA for this property is coincides with what the 2023 rent roll states. We're at 108,322 for a total square foot total square foot of the property. When you compare that to the appellant's pro forma, they're 5,166 square feet shy of what the 2023 rent roll indicates. And that is showing that the income they didn't attribute to the 5,166. So that NOI that they come out to, that's even lower than the original assessment, is somewhat skewed because it doesn't impute that income in the pro forma. In addition to that, we did find that with the the new listings for the property, there was a lease signed for 5,403 square feet. We did not include that against the vacant square footage, the total 56,622. We do see that it was leased prior to the valuation date. We also see that when you look at the rent roll closely, and this is speaking to the per square foot rate average for the property. On page 6 of 104 is my rent roll analysis. You'll see that there's a rent there attributed to IDS International, and they lease out 7,853 square feet of space in the building. The rent attributable to that tenant on the rent roll states $14.20. And that's aberration compared to the average of the rest of the tenants there, where the average is at $44 per square foot. So to me, when looking at that rent, that is concession rich, where, for whatever reason, they're reporting $14.20 per square foot. And that is how the appellant came up with their average, lower than the county's at $38 and I believe 82 cents. Yeah, $38.82. So when comparing that, that's why the apartment's per square foot rate is higher. It is lower than the average at $44, but we're averaging at $42 a square foot. And then when you walk that back to what was reported and what the actual income is, that actual income in column E1, row 1, that actual income is using that $14.20 as their, as part of that total income for the office properties that are leased. I mean, the office tenants that are leased. So again, looking at that, the county still tests lower than that actual income, and with the agents, lower rates, so that we come up with a potential gross income of less than $448,640 if you look at the original assessment versus the reconstructed. And then if you look at the test, we're about almost 60,000 less than what was projected if you compare columns F to column E1, gross potential income, line 7. And then as Mr. Harmon pointed out, we adjusted the expenses accordingly. We were looking at the 2022 original I&E at $10. We did project $10 for this property. Upon review, we did bump that up 45 cents to $10.45. And then if you go all the way down, we're still about almost 200,000 less than what the NOI projection would be for the property had they included the vacant square footage income. So then we did deduct the excess vacancy below the line, and it still confirms the original assessment based on the new information that was received. So based on that, we do ask that the board confirm this case. Thank you.
All right, thank you both. Questions from the board members? Mr. Metzger.
I have a question, excuse me, for the department. The difference, you brought this up, but I want to extend it. Increasing the NLA by over 5,000 square feet. Is that to account for the conference room that you mentioned on page 3 of 119 down the bottom? You're including that in LA?
No, actually, that's another good point that you bring up. The total square footage for the building should be much higher than 108,322. The rent roll does not indicate square footage for those spaces. And so therefore that would decrease the percentage of vacancy in the building by increasing the total net leasable area of the property.
Right. But you say it should be more than 108. There's some other space, leasable spaces that you discovered but haven't this year included. Is that what you're saying? And that's
No. At 108, that is how the rent roll was shown. What I'm stating for the lower level conference center and the second floor conference center, there was no square footage indicated. As you see other office properties, they do indicate a square footage, and that's part of the total NLA of other properties in the county.
Well, that's my question. Are these conference centers leasable or are they amenities like the
They are
exercise?
amenities. They are amenities, but it contributes to the total square footage of the building. And you see that in the past, these for older buildings, they have converted in the past net leasable area into conference centers and vice versa
Yeah.
on different occasions.
Okay, so you are, so again, and where I started, that increase of 5,000 plus, that does not include conference areas.
No.
Rather
No.
just real, no kidding tenant space.
Correct.
Okay, so it should even be higher. Okay.
And
Question.
if I may
Okay,
address
yeah,
that
yeah,
too, Mr.
please.
Mayor.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you a question.
So
Go
the
ahead.
prior year's rent rolls do show 103,000 square feet. So I believe the increase of 5,000 square feet year over year is probably attributable to those conference center spaces. We weren't aware of the discrepancy prior to the county's decision. Had they brought this to our attention, we could have investigated it and seen, it looks like they're including that this year, but not listing it out specifically on the rent roll because going back to the 2 years prior rent rolls, they do list the total NLA as 103,000 square feet.
That's right. It's always 103 until this year. Yeah, if we're back here again next year, I'm sure the two of you will get together long before them and find out what the real NLA is. So for the appellant, this one aberrant lease at $14 plus a square foot, could you spend a sentence or two on what that's about, why that's so unusual?
So I believe they had concessions at the time as of the date of the rent roll. So what I did to account for that was I went back and I said, okay, what was the lease rate as of January 1 a year prior? And then I grew that by 2.5% to assume a natural growth in the lease. And what that does to the average leased office space is it comes in at 43.86. So it comes in right at the county's number, just below at $44 a foot. So the $14 a foot, I believe, includes concessions as of the date of the rent roll. But if we correct for that, and I put it in at $45.22 a foot, and that brings the overall average office leased to $43.86.
Okay, good. That answers it. Thank you. I get that.
Okay, other questions? No? Okay, Mr. Peralta, if you take a minute to wrap up.
Yes, thank you. Actually, in September of this year, the owners have applied for a site plan amendment, major site plan amendment to convert the property to 323 apartments with 18,000 retail. That calculation alone, once approved, would make the property 28,948 for just the land, 28,948,000 for just the land for that property for that conversion. We're valuing this property at 21,964,200, and with the land that's allocated for this valuation at 7 million. It's a shame Mr. Barnes weren't here, but I think he can speak more to this, and that to me would support the land value even more, but I mean that's for another case. But based on the information that I've provided and based on the projected income of this property, the original assessment is well supported. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Harmon, if you take a minute to wrap up, please.
Yes, thank you. Just want to try to tie this all together nicely. If we look at the current assessment, they did include concessions on the rental rate. Average concessions per lease square foot have averaged $5.50 a foot. The office rental rate that the county used was $5 a square foot lower than actual in place. That accounts for concessions. Where the current assessment fails to properly value the property is operating expenses and the DFL. Now, if we take the county's test, which corrected those two variables, If we take the county's test operating expenses, $1,132,000, and the test DFL, which accounts for the actual vacancy at the property as of the first of the year, the final value comes out at $18,194,000. That's much closer to where this property would have traded as of the first of the year. It grows OpEx slightly, not enough, but it also gets the DFL closer to actual vacancy for this high vacancy property. Thank you.
Thank you both. Okay, it's just someone on the board. Or is it Mr. Mansell?
I'll play the part of Barnes Lawson in this case, where he correctly points out almost every meeting that for office buildings chronically experiencing vacancy in excess of 50%, that we may wish to increase the cap rate for that exceptional situation. And this one does, of course, meet that. And it occurs to me that in this down office building market, that an 8% decrease maybe isn't sufficient, and therefore we ought to increase, because I like the test a lot. I thought that was really good stuff. But I think we should suggest to you that we increase the cap rate in the test column by 50 basis points and run new numbers. And I haven't done that, but I'd be happy to.
I ran that test, and it was a slight reduction. But I don't think I would go with that rationale, just because I think the test column, like you said, is really good. The appellant seems to agree with a lot of the numbers there. Looking at the operating expenses, they've never reported $11. So I didn't see a reason to bump those, so I'd be okay with the current assessment. When I ran the test, it came out to $20,617,000.
Well, remember, in the operating expenses, this appellant's contention oftentimes is, excuse me, that the numbers that we're working off of are actual expenditures, not plussed up for if the building were 85 or 90% occupied. So they're really, but we do plus up the income as if it were 90% or 100% occupied. That's always the contention. So certainly plussing it up in the test columns more than warranted, for sure, in order to do both potentials. But again, to me, it's all about this building. The fact that it's developing a site plan is interesting, but of course doesn't affect us today. But I thought the chronic, I mean, I'm in that building twice a week. I know it very well. And it's a nice building and nobody will rent, not nobody, but not enough people will rent there. And I don't know why. So that's from, but you say no. So maybe up to 3.
Can I add just one thing to that?
Of course.
It's 52% vacant. In the past, when we bumped up the cap rate, I think it's been around the 60%. If it was 62%, I probably would entertain that, but 52% is just too
close
for me.
For you to fine. Great.
Yeah, I did a different approach. I took, because I thought on the test the rents actually were a little high, going from 39 to 42. So I was originally trying to work off of the original assessment, but correcting the square footage to include the 56,000, because what happens is below the line, there's not enough deduction because there's not enough square footage included in that number. So I went back off of the test and corrected the rents and the square footage based on what that square footage was on the test. And I end up at 20,991,900, which is pretty close to what you had. Test to that. So.
I thought about doing that too, but then I compared D and the columns pro forma, or the appellant's pro forma, and the GPI is they have a higher GPI, they've got a higher EGI. And the only difference is the expenses, which is why I looked into bumping up the expenses. But
Exactly where I came from.
Yeah.
All the gyrations on the numbers. I hear the appellant, but I'm sitting here looking at what EGI is in their pro forma and column D. And the only thing I saw as potential is adjusting below the line on D, but I'm fine with it. I mean, I don't think I think the appellant is saying that he works. I know he's not down there completely, but
What if you said on the original adjustment below the line?
yes,
'Cause I-
because that's where the number's off.
Right, well, below the line there, one and adjusting, it ends up at 19,424, 900.
That's what I think is a fair adjustment.
You would have to adjust the top also.
Right, that's what I started with, and then I thought, oh, wait, but then I don't have,
Right.
I'm done, so that's when I went. back
That's why
over
I-
here, and I went back to 20 million, it's less than $1 million difference, so.
Would you reiterate that $20 million rationale?
So what originally I did is I just took the original assessment.
Yep.
Which is D.
Mhm.
And changed the below the line adjustments to include for the additional square footage that's.
That 5,000 plus.
And that comes out to 19,424,900, call it. But then I realized that the square footage above isn't correct. So then I tried to do a ton of math. Of
That's
changing
where I
it
stopped.
41,680. 1020, and then, kind of went down that way. And I end up leaving the cap rate to 20,991,900. Which, like I said, it's less than $1 million. So it's a lot of math that is kind of in the weeds, if you will. So I'm leaning more towards the original assessment being okay.
Yeah, I'm okay with it. I mean, I was pretty much following Mr. Mendes' steps, and the only thing I ended up trying to make an adjustment on the expenses, but I'm not convinced, like Mr. Harmon said, that they are really not accounting for that. I think their test shows that they really did check it. So I'm okay with it.
Yeah.
So
And I don't care about the $11.
Yeah,
Versus
it's
1050.
minus. It's a,
No. I mean, because I think, again, when you're doing two different square footage numbers, it doesn't matter. The numbers are the numbers. So one's using a 10.5
Yes.
Yeah.
1,131, the other one's using 1,134.
well, and there's a difference between the 278, and I still have a very small print, versus 946. Would it be worth looking at simply doing, for simplicity, an arbitrary adjustment that 236? I mean, it's a small amount. But that's where I see an error is.
What's the 236?
Yeah.
Down below the line. I'm sorry.
Which you
278. Less rent loss.
Okay, calm
I
down.
could do,
Right, but the only problem, that's what I said, I did that. And I come at the 19 million, but the problem is you gotta go up.
go back up, and that's where I stopped.
And so
So it's either pick a number.
But you didn't. I mean, you did it.
I did it both
I think
ways.
that's,
I did it just the first way without correcting the top. And then I did it correcting the top,
yeah.
and it's less than $1 million. And so,
Well, we do adjust
Yeah,
things less than
yeah.
$1 million.
Yeah, especially based on reasonable rationale. I mean, these are numbers. I mean, because this accounts for this extraordinary concession. It's interesting that this year, and of course it plays out over years, they didn't take a $500,000 hit this year, but all of a sudden, maybe they're trying to plus up their vacancy by offering much more concessions than ever before.
I can go either way. I mean, if you want to put a number out there that you're comfortable with.
972,000 less.
Yeah.
So I don't agree with that.
I mean, like I said, I'm okay with the original assessment. I think it's just we're trying to pick numbers very
Right.
minor to just make
I'm kind of like that.
And they're arbitrary numbers, I guess. They're not based on fact. Okay, that's good enough.
I'm fine.
All right, well then, with all of that, then I'm gonna move to confirm the county at 21,964,200. Turn around as a second, all in favor? Great, it's unanimous. The county is confirmed at 21,964,200. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you all.
Okay,
Yes, thank you all.
that completes the agenda. Does anybody have anything else? Okay, then we will stand adjourned. Sorry?
Yeah, the last.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. All right, that doesn't complete the agenda. Okay, RPC 2003107, 200 North Glebe Road. You still have Mr. Peralta? There we go. Thank you, sir. I'm
Yes.
sorry. The request has been to withdraw. I assume no objection.
No objection.
Okay, I'll move to accept the withdrawal. Do I have a second? Mr. Metzgen, all in favor? Aye. Okay, that's unanimous. In the last case, RPC 15071-051 at 3101 Wilson Boulevard. Same thing, motion or request to withdraw. Any objection, Mr. Peralta?
No objection.
Okay, I'll motion to accept the withdrawal. Do I have a second? Mr. Yates? All in favor? I oppose. Okay, that is also unanimous. That case is withdrawn. Now that completes the agenda.
Thank you.
Mr. Panoranda, I would have gone right over those two cases. Okay, all right, well, that being said, then we stand adjourned here at 10:04. We will reconvene this Tuesday morning, October 8th at 9 a.m. virtually for all the board members. That completes everything. Thank you.